Afternoon, everybody. Hopefully, our Facebook Live will be fine today. I'm sure that the mic is probably not as good as what we would want, but that's okay. We're still perfecting, and that's when you're in leadership, you just got to go with what you got. So, today I wanted to talk a little bit about what is leadership. And just to discuss some of the aspects that, as a leader, that are some of the foundational basics that you have to have. Because a leader is different than a manager. A manager is just someone who manages a process. They have direct reports, and those direct reports have to get a particular job done to earn a paycheck. And it's a very transactional type of a relationship. But a leader is actually someone who inspires others to fulfill a goal or a set of goals. It's much, much more than just managing a process within an organization. It is inspiring people through vision, with different types of power sources that we'll get into later. But the key to being a leader is that you have to have voluntary followers. Now, that's a weird concept in corporate America, a voluntary follower. You know, I've spent 20 plus years in leadership in corporate America and another 13, 15 years as an entrepreneur running my own business. And I had 10, 12 people that worked for me for that decade plus. And in those leadership roles and in those experiences, as an entrepreneur, you're kind of forced into learning how to lead, because if you don't lead effectively, when it's your paycheck. I mean, when people aren't performing well, that directly affects how much you get paid and how much your family gets paid. But when you're in a corporate role, you can slide into being a manager or just be a manager because you're drawing a salary, and as long as you're hitting your goals, nobody's probably going to look too close at how well you're managing. The people that you're managing are know how well you manage, but it's no wonder that 60+% of all Americans, no matter whether the economy was bad, like a decade ago, or 6 years ago, or whether the economy is good now, the statistic of Americans who don't like their boss, and if they had a chance, they would actually migrate jobs, hovers between 50 and 60%. And the vast majority of that is simply because they don't care for the leadership style or the management style of the person that they work for. And we want to change that. As a leader, the last thing we want to do, or as a manager, is to be mediocre and to be an immature leader or a mediocre leader leads to mediocre performance, mediocre teams, and obviously mediocre lifestyle. So voluntary, this whole idea of voluntary, this was actually pretty strange to me when I first heard it, and I'm sure it's strange to you as you're watching, that even in corporate America, the people that are getting paid to do a job still have to voluntarily choose to follow you. And I've had bosses that were not very good bosses, and all we did was comply to the person's requests. Really, the reason why we came to work was so that we could get a paycheck and support our families and support our own lifestyles. But we didn't do, unless it was in our own best interest, most people just don't do above and beyond, or go above and beyond for a manager who doesn't lead. And when you have voluntary followers, those voluntary followers will work for you, as they say, like Simon Sinek says, with blood, sweat, and tears, but they will go above and beyond, the performance for you, and not just stop at barely good enough or just getting by street. And I know in my career that's been the reasons why I've had a lot of growth and success, why my reputation has been one of taking underperforming teams over and revitalizing them and creating high-performing teams out of them. 10 times out of the 10, when I'm taking over an underperforming team, they're typically underperforming because they were working for a manager. They weren't working for a leader. They weren't voluntarily following the person that they reported to. They were doing so, and much to my dismay, more than half the time, or at least half the time, that former manager was leading by coercion, which coercive power just breeds resentment and compliance. And the other half were just middle of the road managers, kind of what Blake and Mouton called country club managers. They wanted to be more of a friend than a leader. So we'll explore a little bit more about how to develop voluntary followers. But one of the things that it does require, as far as voluntary followers, is that you have to have a balanced personal maturity. Great and good leaders are also mature people, and that maturity has nothing to do with age. And I know as we go through this presentation, you're going to recognize some people in politics. You're also going to recognize in both parties, Republican and Democrats, and independent. I guess that'd be three parties. You're also going to recognize some of these people at your workplace and in your life. And as a PhDC or going through doctoral studies, it isn't philosophy. And one of the things in behavioral sciences that we study and have documented scientifically, this isn't theory, this isn't religion, although you know that I'm a man of faith. And if you don't know that, you'll see that throughout our presentations, my presentations, that even at the doctoral level, scientifically, we have proven different parts of developing as a human being and how our mental maturity changes over time, and it has nothing to do with age. And as we go through this, you should actually recognize, be able to pick out other people's levels of maturity as well as your own. So why is this important? Why is it important to understand about your own personal maturity level and the personal maturity level of others? It's really easy. People can be leaders and be immature. But just because they're immature doesn't mean that what they're doing is invalid. It just means that they themselves as a person are immature. And what's interesting is their maturity level. You can be a poor leader and you can be a good leader, but be in the earlier stages or the latter stages of maturity as a person. What we find is that those that are typically in management or quote leadership positions that are on the earlier levels of maturity as a person, that they exhibit behaviors that typically cause other people discomfort. And we're going to get into that, and it's not a good discomfort because all leaders are going to cause some discomfort, otherwise they wouldn't be leaders. You got to be challenged to grow, and any good leader is going to challenge you, and that's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be good uncomfortableness. So what does the maturity look like? There are three, and again, yes, there's body, spirit, soul. Wow, that sounds just like religion. And what's interesting is that science is proving and has been proving that there is a spiritual aspect to all human life. And it's indisputed. And as a doctoral student in behavioral sciences, it is part of what we study. And so more and more when we talk about maturity and leadership, that aspect of maturing is being added into the study of human behavior. But that's not what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss a little bit about body and a little bit about soul. And your soul basically is three parts. That encompasses your mind, your will, and your emotions. Now, depending on your upbringing, whether it be religious, Christian, religious, Hindu, Buddhist, or other, this concept is fairly common as far as body, mind, and spirit, body, soul, and spirit, some combination of a triune being. What I've found is that the soulical realm, especially from a Hebraic or Judeo-Christianity aspect, is the most sound, and it actually predates all of the other religions, and that's a whole other debate that we don't necessarily need to get into right now. But it is the oldest written alphabetic, in an alphabet, actually words, written religion in the world. And the soul is made up of mind, will, and emotions. So, as a doctoral student, for instance, or you listening on the webinar, you are developing your mind. That is the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding part of your intellect. As you have natural ability to, or talents, those talents have to be developed. And those talents are to develop, for instance, if you want to be a mathematician or a rocket science, you aren't just naturally born with the ability to do calculus and diffie-q and physics and all of the advanced mathematics that takes. You actually go to school and learn those things. And this is one thing, if millennials and Gen Zs and other people that are on this webinar are listening right now, one of the reasons that you might be struggling in life and not able to get a good job is simply because our culture, and in many cultures, has downplayed the development of your mind. In our economy, we are a merit-based economy, and certain jobs are more difficult than the others. And being an engineer or a rocket scientist is much more difficult than flipping burgers at McDonald's. It doesn't take a lot of development of the mind, will, and the emotions to be able to flip burgers at McDonald's, as opposed to, excuse me, develop a piece of a rocket that, if it fails, might cost a company billions of dollars, and it might cost 7 astronauts their lives, like what happened on the space shuttle a decade or two ago. So developing your mind is an incredibly important concept when it comes to not only just leadership, but just in life in general. And that is your education. Even as, I started out my career in construction. Even as a construction worker, I still needed to understand how to do math in angles and whatnot to be a carpenter, to be able to frame out a home. I had to understand, watch any HGTV program. Those carpenters have to do math. They have to understand geometry. Without that, you cannot be a carpenter. No different than, I've got a great friend, Chad, who is phenomenal. He builds custom motorcycles, $100,000 type motorcycles. When he does his design work, he has to understand how the metal's going to work, the forces that are in play, or what type of weld is going to take what type of, how much strength it's going to need. All of those things he learned by developing his mind. Your will is just simply your desires. What is it that you want to do? We talk about this in Choosing a Career in my book on the value of career choice. What are the things that you like to do? Your will is the part of you that when you get out of bed in the morning says, you know what, I'm going to get out of bed and go to work, because getting a paycheck and being able to pay my rent feels a heck of a lot better than sleeping in and being homeless. You know, so your will has a lot to do with just success in life in general. So, for instance, there are a lot of people who maybe have had emotional difficulties and they tend to self-medicate using alcohol or drugs or whatnot. There are a lot of those when they go through a program, they educate their mind a little bit, and then their will becomes active, and their will says, you know what, that way of self-medicating is not healthy for me anymore, and I can have a better life if I actually, for instance, learn that the way that I talk and the things that I speak over myself, negative or positive, actually changes the chemicals and the chemical makeup in my brain. Yeah, that's true. There's a great book, I suggest you get it, called Turn On Your Mind. And that book is written by a neurologist, and it actually shows how positive psychologies such as self-talk is one of the topics, and how you talk about or to yourself shapes the world around you and how you see it, and even controls the chemicals and the chemical makeup in the mind, and can help overcome or prevent depression, help make you more of an optimist as opposed to a negative type person. And the topic's called self-talk. So as your mind becomes a little bit more educated, your will can kick in and go, you know what, I no longer want that lifestyle anymore. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in regard to an area that I've struggled with in keeping balanced in my body, and how my will and my emotions have played into that. And your emotions, love, hate, anger, fear, everything in between, friendships kind of love, spouse kind of love, love for like the outdoors, all different types of love. Matter of fact, New York Life is a great commercial on the different words that the Greeks had for love. But bottom line is, your emotions and your will and your mind are directly, all three, they're integrated, they're tied together. And so someone who has a lower level of education is going to see the world a particular way because they have certain beliefs about how the world operates. They are going to exercise their will to live a particular way. They're going to will themselves into either a better or a lower education. They're going to will themselves into deciding whether or not they're going to try to get a job at McDonald's flipping burgers, or get a college education, or go to a trade school and join a union. And the emotional results of those things directly affect all parts of your life. And it is a fact, although money will never buy and cannot and doesn't buy happiness, money does make things easier. There's no doubt about that. It's still the number one reason for divorce in the United States. It's been this way for decades. Our finances, fighting over finances, fighting over goods, fighting over material possessions. And your education or your mind development in your will directly affects the type of job that you take, how well you do your job, and your emotions are a direct reflection of that. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the different, what are called action logics that control these things, or at least the levels today we're going to discuss, what level that we're on. And Tolbert is a behavioral scientist, one of them, that studies maturity levels. And I'm going to describe these different action logics so that you can understand where they're at, maybe identify your level. And then in our next session, we're going to begin to get some resources that will help you have some exercises to improve your maturity level. And as we go through these, as I said, you're going to recognize some people in politics very high in politics on both levels, both predominant parties, Democrat and Republicans, and you're going to realize that even though they're elected officials and they have very, very important jobs in regard to their leadership and personal maturity level, it's low. And so the first level is impulsive. The first two levels are impulsive and opportunist. Impulsive, typically an impulse, this is someone that doesn't, think about somebody who's going through puberty and they're in junior high. They're impulsive. They don't think out their decisions very well. We can easily identify them that their minds are not as developed as what we would like, nor are their decision-making capabilities. Matter of fact, today, I think women are around 21 years old, becoming mature, typical to make good decisions. Men about 25. But we have different parts of our brain that develop over time. And in these earlier stages, the more basic part of our brain is making decisions for us. This is why people, will act sometimes erratically, but also engage in dangerous activities because their decision-making ability just isn't very mature. The next level up from that is opportunist. Matter of fact, an impulsive person, well, let me back up. On the impulsive piece, one of the things that is characterized by that, this is also the person who is a habitual criminal. That person doesn't have the ability to recognize fully the decision that they make in the heat of the moment. And so there's a pattern in their life that they keep making bad decisions over and over again. And I tell you, I have friends right now. My wife used to work in the court systems here in Pinellas County. And there's young people that are just constant repeat offenders. And one of the problems that we have in today's society is that these younger people, and it's not even just younger people, I mean, there's people in their 40s and 50s that are in this situation. They make impulsive decisions based on the circumstances that they're currently in, because that's their level of maturity. And until they mature beyond that, they just are unable to make a good decision. And therefore, they're hungry, so they impulsively steal. They're cold, so they impulsively or don't have money for rent, so they impulsively steal. They're just driven by impulse. An opportunist actually makes that choice on purpose. An opportunist takes a situation and says, what would be best for me in this situation? How can I better myself? And they take the opportunity not to do good to the whole, but to benefit themselves. Man, I've written multiple papers on bosses that I've had over the years. And I have one in particular that operated the opportunist, and then the next level up, which is diplomat. And an opportunist is a person who, let's see, at work, where maybe they're your leader or maybe they're on your team, and there's an opportunity for them to look good, whether it makes you look good, whether or not they steal your idea or take credit for your idea, or hide the fact that you were actually the one that did the work and it was your performance that actually made their number. When they're in front of their bosses, they take the opportunity to make themselves look good so that they can get promoted and life is better for them without the thought of another person. Pretty clear. Opportunist, right? The next level up is diplomat. At the diplomat level, this is really kind of like, most people hit this in high school and in college. But the scary part is the vast majority of Americans never make it past this level. This is the level in which you find your identity in other people. You recognize that, let's say, this is when fashion becomes important. I recognize that this group of people are popular, And then I recognize the characteristics about them that make them popular. Well, I want to be popular and I want to fit in as well. And so I'm going to dress and start to act like they are so I can join their little group. And if I can join their little group, I get a feeling of acceptance. I get feelings of that I'm good, that I can accept myself because I'm accepted by others. And it's their acceptance of me that makes me feel whole. And so why is it called a diplomat? Well, it's pretty simple. You're negotiating, or like an ambassador. As a diplomat, you've got to figure out how to find your way of acceptance into that group. And this is another group of leaders that I see all the time in corporate America. Leaders who are not strong enough to hire other strong leaders hire their friends, because they surround themselves with friends who won't challenge them, or they simply are in this level of leadership maturity and they simply are afraid that of not being accepted. So what they'll do is they'll get around a group of other very strong leaders, and then over time replace those leaders with friends that they could be in the good old boy club with, or the good old girl club with. It's not gender related at all. It is maturity related. This is like in high school or in college. I was in this fraternity, and this fraternity had this particular characteristics, and if you weren't part of my fraternity, you weren't part of my friends. I've got my little accepted group over here, but you're not in our group, and therefore we can't be friends or do business or whatever that might be. This happens all the time in corporate America, and you got one leader over here in one division, and they've got their little group of leadership friends that they've negotiated with, that they're going to protect each other. And then over here in this division, you've got another group similar to them, and they compete against each other. And instead of being able to work together for the benefit of the company, they're always at odds with each other. And they're not in alignment, and it costs the organization the ability to work together as a whole, as one cohesive unit. The diplomat level and the opportunist level also tend to seem to attract Machiavellian leaders as well, people that aren't necessarily the most ethical in the world. Now, the next level up is expert. Expert level is where more than 50% of, roughly 50%, 47% of all corporate American leaders lie. And this is very similar. I spent many, many years there. Matter of fact, a lot of my peers got their jobs, especially coming from the tech world. In the tech world, you get your promotion and you get your prestige by the expert level or expertise that you show. The challenge there is that at the expert level of maturity, as a leader, you always want to be right. As the expert, it's very important for you to have the right answer. And so this is when you see, for instance, software, IT type people or scientific minded people, and they're always arguing about which one is right. They're not so necessarily concerned with how well the business is doing, or business drivers, or things that would drive the business. They want to be right. If there's a question that comes up by one of their team members, they're the ones that want to have the right answer and to be seen as having the right answer. They're also the students that will not receive, they typically want to be the straight A student. A B is just not necessarily acceptable. They want to be the expert. This is where most managers in America lie. Very few make it to what's called the achiever level. And the difference between the expert level and the achiever level is huge. And I remember, I know the year, I know the job I took when I moved from expert to achiever level. And it was marked by reading a book by John Maxwell called the 17 Irrefutable Laws of Teamwork. Because there's a couple of things I've always gone by, and all my teams have known that, and it's nothing great happens without a team. None of us are as smart as all of us. And you really can't move past the expert level and embrace those two, unless you embrace those two sayings. Because at the achiever level, that's when you actually are mentoring and developing people and you're building teams. So achievers are team builders, flat and simple. They are your mentors. They are the ones who take a team and take underperforming teams, take the people underneath their wings that can be mentored and mentor them up into high-performing people. That is achiever. Now, if you go to Europe, here's the scary thing. 60+% of Europe's leaders are at the achievement level. They understand the power of teamwork. Now, maybe that's because they have a different background historically than we do in regard to the political system, and even maybe religious beliefs. And that here in America, we are so much about personal achievement and wanting to be seen as that superstar expert, that for some reason we just can't get beyond that maturity level of expertise or being an expert to the achiever level. But when you get to the achiever level, what you'll all of a sudden find out is that barriers that were there as an expert and performance levels that you couldn't get past as an expert, all of a sudden those doors open and your team begins to flourish. And because your team is flourishing, you begin to flourish. And as you flourish, your division begins to flourish. And this really, in my opinion in leadership, there shouldn't be a vice president on the planet that is not at least at this achiever level. Because that whole idea of being a vice president is the fact that you can build a team and you can develop that team over time to be a great performer. Really, if you're going to manage people, period, you should be at the achiever level. And the sad part is we have so many, like I said, 47% of people managers are just experts, and they don't really understand how to manage people. And that's one of the things we got to get past in America. So moving on beyond what's beyond an achiever, an individualist, and usually individualists are people that are starting to are in the senior management, more executive level. And they say, well, I thought you said individualism isn't good. No, that's not the kind of individualism we're talking about. Let me give you an example. One time we were hiring a vice president at a large corporation I was working for. We wanted to promote somebody from within. And as we sat around the table with the senior vice presidents and the regional vice presidents, and we were identifying different candidates, it came down to about 3 candidates. One of the questions that actually came up was internal fortitude, or the ability to stand up for yourself and not be railroaded by your counterparts, and to have a voice of your own. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about it being an individualist. It means that I no longer rely on being a part of X group or anyone else to feel good about me. And I got to tell you, right now in my life, and I have for the last 5 or 6 years, I feel good about me. It's that Saturday Night Live thing where the guy, Gunther, whoever it was, looked in the mirror. He's like, gosh darn it, I like myself, right? There aren't that many people in the United States that really like themselves. That is an actual level of maturity, of human maturity, is to look at yourself and not need any external, anyone or anything outside of yourself saying you're okay. It's okay for you to say you're okay. I'm okay with me. I'm all right with me. I'm okay not being a Matthew McConaughey. I'm okay without being Bill Gates, even though I'm in technology, without having all of the successes. I'm okay. I'm okay with me. And when you're okay with you, it frees you up on a whole nother level to be able to start seeing things that in an interconnected way. And I talk about it in my book. It's called System Thinking, and it's incredibly important when it comes to leadership and organization development. But an individualist, because they're no longer concerned with whether or not XYZ senior vice president likes them as a person, they can concentrate on what's best for the company and what's best for the people that work for them, as well as what's best for themselves and what's best for their family. In my book, it's the beginning of actually being able to truly love or truly care about not only yourself, but about those around you. Because as long as you live in a place and a level of maturity where you get your acceptance through others, you'll never be able to unconditionally love anything or anyone. And again, why do we have so many difficulties in America with happiness or unhappiness, depression? Gen X is the least happy generation ever in America at work. And it's because we're not maturing to the higher levels of human maturity and for different reasons. And this is the individualist stage. We're struggling to get leaders and managers to get to the expert or past the expert stage in the team building. Europe seems to have the team building thing down, which is great, but we've got to get past that to where we feel okay with ourselves and we're not leaking emotionally on other people about our own personal difficulties or unhappiness. The next level up from that is a strategist. Once you're comfortable with yourself, once you are freed up from having to find acceptance in the eyes of other people, you can move on to the strategist level, which all the tests in every one of these levels, I'm going to show you some tests, and the tests will actually show you and identify where you're at in this level, and then we're going to give you tools on how to mature to the higher levels of maturity. And it's not only will change the way you lead, it will change your entire life perspective. It will change your family. It will change the people around you. It will change your perspective on life. And I am at the point of a strategist. And this is where you get to the point where you can strategically, and that's why, if anybody ever wonders, everything that I talk about is strategic this or strategic that. And when you get to that level of strategy, you can not only see how things work together as a system, like if family is a unit, there's a systematic thing that everybody has their different roles, where people are playing their roles correctly, and it's not necessarily a gender thing, they're just roles that in jobs that have to get done to run a household. And when people are running that household and doing their roles, it works well as a system. When someone's not doing their part and there's a chink in the system, it doesn't work so well. I mean, again, think about system thinking. It's like a Swiss watch. If there's a gear inside the watch that breaks, the rest of the watch just doesn't work that well. The second hand might not work, the rest of it might work, but it just won't work together well as a whole. And so, as a strategist, not only can you see the little individual parts in divisions or departments within an organization, how they function as a system. For instance, we do a lot of stuff with the first responders community. So when a firefighter takes a look at a fire truck, that fire truck has different systems that do different things. And just to pump the water, there's one system for controlling pumping the water. If part of that isn't working well or isn't maintained, then the pumping system can go down. But there's also another system on that fire truck that runs the sirens and the horns the electrical part of that truck. And maybe the electrical part of the truck is what powers things like the jaws of life and a whole different set of types of tools. It's a completely different set of system, another system. So that fire truck is a system of systems, or what's called a meta system. And a strategist can actually take a look at the entire thing and design a fire truck that not only do they design the fire truck so that each individual system works together, that fire truck then has a part to play as a system in the overall firefighting strategy, which includes paramedics and EMTs and ambulance server and different types of fire trucks, and then management of people and the structure of those people. Right, and each person that works on a particular fire truck, there's a driver, there's different officers that each have their different roles, right? All of those are systems within systems, and or what are called a meta system, or a complex adaptive system. And as the fire chiefs get promoted, lieutenant, and so on up to chief, and then head chief, like in our area, Scott Sanders. They have to be able to look at the entire system of systems, to be able to grasp all of that. That is an actual level of human maturity and how your brain functions to be able to do that. So if you're a leader or someone who wants to be a leader and you're wondering why in the world at work you haven't been able to attain to a higher level of leadership, 9 times out of 10, it's simply because the next level of leadership is beyond your level of maturity. Now, in your ability to think in a systems level. Now, what's crazy is that just because you make it to the strategist level, and let's say, and I won't use Scott as an example, but let's just say a politician. So you have one politician on one side who rips up speeches, union address speeches, and on the other side you have a politician who likes to impulsively tweet. I'm not getting into any form of bipartisan politics. I'm just pointing out levels of leadership maturity. Both of those people can look out as a strategist and see all the meta systems and the complex adaptive systems that are at work in the United States. One from a very political, entrenched political standpoint, that she understands how politics work in the United States and that system of systems. One who came from a business background and understands how business systems work. And the one on this side doesn't necessarily understand the right side on the business piece, and the business piece maybe not understand all the things on the policy and the politics side. And then what happens is in the areas in which they are weak, they show signs of opportunists, they show some impulsiveness, they certainly show some diplomat, who do I fit in with, my cliquey club. So you can be very mature in some areas and still be immature in others. And that explains, people are like, how in the world can someone who masterminds an economy that is booming and then tweaks so impulsively? And how can someone over here on this side mastermind an entire party in the direction that they're going in and then do things that are impulsive that end up costing the party or costing at least the American people certain things? And that's because you can be very mature in certain areas and immature in others. And so what we want to do as leaders is we want to go through these levels. We want to find out which level that we're on. And then we want to address our weaknesses and strengthen our strengths. Because all of us have both. But if we don't know where those lie and we don't know what level that we're on, we won't understand how to make ourselves a better leader. And that's what these series are all about. How to become a great leader. Not just an average leader, not just a good leader, but a great leader. And great leaders have to become personally mature. The last leader is called an alchemist. Think Gandhi. Think Nelson Mandela. Think Mother Teresa. People whose understanding of the world good that goes far beyond their own aspect of who they are as a person. These are the all-time great leaders that, when you look at history, have changed the world. So, very few people get to this level, so it's really not, we're not going to explore it. But what we are doing next time is that we're going to get out and I'm going to give you some resources where you can go test yourself and find out what level of maturity that you're on personally, and then what to do about it. And what some of the positives and negatives, what are some of the benefits and some of the consequences of the level that you might currently be on. So until next time, cheers, and we'll talk to you soon.